What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind.
Nightmare Success listeners, where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, I've got the girl next door that went to prison. I just told her that. I'm about halfway through. It's Lynn Espejo. Am I pronouncing that right?
Espejo.
Espejo. Is that right? I always am bad with names, but Espejo. So in her book is titled Inside the Walls and Beyond, My Journey Through the Federal with parentheses around a justice system. And when I say this is the girl next door, this is the girl, if you read her book, I'm about halfway through this fascinating, just, it's a page-turner book, and it's a nonfiction book, which is a page-turner book. And she was working in an office with doctors. She was the clinic administrator, and all the way up to this point, this is a good person that's just working like everybody else is and doing their thing. And she's working with these doctors, and they're all arguing and doing and whatever. And she's all part in that, soap opera drama of the craziness of this doctor's office. But the great thing about Lynn is, and what I've learned talking with her, is she is such a impactful voice for change for the justice-impacted people. There's some crazy stuff that I want to get into. One of them is that she, in her transfer, she's trying to get closer to home. And, of course, they sent her further away from home. But during that, instead of just giving her a furlough because she was in the lowest security prison, she ended up into the whole Con Air experience of flying to Oklahoma and the transfer. And she gets put into solitary confinement for 100 days in the men's wing. 100 days of solitary confinement. We were just talking about it. It's just like I was in for like 6 or 7 hours, and my pansy self thought I was in for 2 years. But she was in for 100 days, and we'll get into that. And the other thing is, if you want something just as a quick read, my friend Walt Pavlo wrote a really great article in Forbes magazine. You can get it online, and it's called Inmate on Home Confinement Spoke Out on Bureau of Prisons Policy and Ended Up Back in Prison. And that's a quick, fast, you get a real read of what we're talking about with Lynn and how she might be scared. I don't know. I don't see it from where her actions are and what she did and how she does it, still does it. Such a strong voice and just doesn't back down. That's what I love about her. Before we get into that and unpack all that, I want to recognize our show sponsor. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking the car lots looking for a car? I don't think they like that. Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip of getting a root canal. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle of getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they will go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Welcome in, Lynn. How are you?
Good, Brent. Thanks for having me on.
So, Lynn, and the other thing, Lynn's been such a help to me because I love when somebody is connected and she's connected, and she's given me some great people to talk to that the listeners out there are going to be able to listen to in the coming weeks. And she's just been a great help. But Lynn, your book, I feel like I've been living inside your head here the last few days. I think I got your book on Sunday, and It just, sometimes when somebody writes a book, you don't really, you see it from a distance. With your book, you really are walking beside you. You're like literally in your space, in your head as you tell it. And I encourage people to get on Amazon and get this book. Again, it's Inside the Walls and Beyond, and it's a good one. Should be a movie.
I have a copy of it right here, Brent.
There it is, everybody. That's what it looks like. That's what I've got down there in my office I've been reading. And
I'm really proud of it too, because it's self-published.
Well, you should be.
Self-edited, self-published. I mean,
you did the whole thing.
I had to figure out how to even get it to upload on Amazon.
Well, it's a great book. You should be proud of it.
Well,
to let everybody kind of get back into your world and introduce to you, can you let us know, Lynn, like in your world growing up, what was your life like as a kid? Because I know you grew up on a farm, and can you let us into all that?
Yeah, I think I just grew up middle class and just normal. My parents did get divorced when I was younger, and my grandparents did end up raising me, but I feel like I just had a normal life. I went to a small public school. I was popular. I was, a cheerleader, a majorette, in all the clubs, homecoming court, you name it. Just average person, had many friends, grew up in a time where we didn't have computers or any of that. So a lot of outside time. I talk about in my book how I used to pretend to be Jan Brady and ride my bike. And
I thought it was funny in your book that you said Jan Brady to the Marcia Brady, because Marcia was the oldest, and it was always, and then Jan was Marcia. Everybody wants to be Marcia.
No,
you
did it by Jan. I guess I related maybe to her, but I had the same bike with the banana seat, and just grew up really at the time in what seemed like a boring life, but looking back, really just Southern,
small town, living
yes.
all-American world.
Yes.
And good grandparents that took care of you.
Yes, my grandparents raised me, and my sister and I. We were 1 year apart to the day. We had the same birthday, and so we grew up fairly.
How crazy is that?
I know, and we grew up fairly close. Of course, always celebrating birthdays. My joke to her has always been, "I asked for a monkey on my first birthday, and I got you." But and it's true, I did ask for one. So but we grew up close and had this a lot, mainly the same friends. We did a lot of stuff together. My summers were, cheerleading camp, majorette camp, several church camps, just always busy. I think what I think about is a normal, just childhood. I feel like, until I turned 15, my dad did commit suicide when I was 15. And I've not often opened up about that, but I did open up about it in my book. And at the time, I don't think I realized how much that really was going to set something for the rest of my life, not having my father. Even though my grandparents raised us, I was very close with my dad. And so that was I think something that maybe haunted me that I never realized until later when I started working with women with traumas. And then I started going, oh, wait, I had this trauma.
I know that would be a heck of a trauma. Being close with your sister and only being a year apart, did you guys lean on each other when that happened? Or was it more like we're all so busy, we're just moving on, we're just...
I think I was in high school. I think I was in the 10th grade. I may have been in the 11th. And so honestly, life was busy back then. I did not realize until years later, like when you don't have your dad to walk you down the aisle, or things like during my indictment, for instance, I was like, I wish I had my father, things that happen when I think later that maybe was something that I looked at and was like, wow, this affected me more than I thought. And then, of course, especially when I went on to get my counseling degree and started going through a lot of trauma related classes, it all kind of came back too. But I think
that's interesting too. Lynn, because you were in the accounting world, but then you got a master's degree in the world that had nothing to do with accounting. And I mean, you don't really see that very often, where one's very well, it's math related, and the other is the whole mental thinking therapy, feel stuff.
Well,
Different.
after I married my husband that I'm currently married to, I was previously married and we were divorced. And then, some years later, I remarried. And we ended up getting custody of his two sons.
Okay.
And I helped him raise them. They were very young when we got custody of them through a very traumatic situation that I won't get into on your podcast for just out of courtesy to not tell their business to the world.
Yeah.
But, watching them go through what they went through and that season of life made me want to get a counseling degree because I wanted to help other children going through those types of situations. However, I ended up learning that that counseling degree, I really don't help children with. I really help women that's been traumatized. And I think I was,
Well, what drew you, Lynn, what drew you before you got there? What drew you into the accounting world?
Now, my undergrad was accounting and finance.
So what drew you there? How did you get in that world?
My first major when I first went to college was pre-law. I wanted to be an attorney, but then I got married. I got married and we had our son and we had moved out to California. My first husband was in the military, so he was in the Marines. So we lived in California until he got out, and then we moved back to Arkansas because he's also from Arkansas. But when we lived in El Dorado, a small town in South Arkansas, and Murphy Oil was the big employer there. And I had been the general manager of an oil company there that ended up closing. So I was sitting there with no job. And I was like, well, good time to go back to college and finish my degree. But I knew it wasn't practical being married and living somewhere there wasn't a law school that I was going to go to law school at that point. So that dream had kind of passed. And so I was like, what can I do? Oh, well, Murphy Oil hires tons of accountants. I'll just go get an accounting degree. Okay. It wasn't like I really wanted to be an accountant.
It was practical.
And so I went back to college and I ended up getting a double BBA in accounting and finance. During my last year of college, my husband decided he didn't want to be married any longer. And so we ended up going through a divorce. And I like to say he was the mailman that delivered, just not at home, because if I found out he had quite a few deliveries that weren't mail related on his mail route. So anyway, we ended up divorced, and I have no hard feelings towards him. So let me just say that. I think me going back to college and being someone who all I cared about was making straight A's, and I was just like getting our small child going and putting him to bed, and then I would stay up all night long sometimes studying. In fact, I would let other people in class come to my house and we would stay up all night, sometimes, especially in the harder level classes. So I think I said it this way in my book was, we became two ships that passed in the night. We were just roommates anymore. So we ended up divorced. And so I finished my accounting degree. I went to work for Lockheed Martin on the PAC-3 missile program, which at the time was a secure program you couldn't talk about working on, and no one knew about it, but it was
You had a certain amount of clearance for that.
Yes. And so I was a cost accountant for that, but I didn't heal very well from the divorce. I didn't like being in the same small town, and it was just hard for me to move on because I'm not the one that wanted the divorce. So I picked up and moved a couple hours away from there to where I live now. And that's how I met my current husband. He is a CPA and we had things in common. And so he told me he'd help me get a job. And so I didn't realize he really wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to date me, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so we started out being friends and ended up falling in love and getting married. And the rest is history, I guess. He sure has lived through my nightmare of
Well,
federal
and he
prison.
has, and he's been a big part of it. Yeah. And so I'm trying to remember time sequence and when because the kids were all around, and then how did you end up at the doctor's clinic?
Well, so I after I married Poncho, I had just been working some accounting jobs, like controller type jobs. And so after I married him, he worked at a CPA firm, and I was just there one day, and they were like needing people, and they were like, "Why don't you come to work for us?" So I went and started working where he did. I moved over to a different firm after that, and that's where I met one of the doctors. I was his accountant, and he talked me in to coming to work for a clinic he had just joined, a practice. And it was him and 7 other doctors at the time I joined. And so I really wasn't looking for a job, but they wanted me to come be their administrator. At the time, this is so ironic, they were accusing their current administrator of
Right.
wrongdoing.
What
And
you said in the book, it could have been a red flag.
yeah, I had a lot of red flags with them that I ignored. But anyway, they offered me $25,000 more a year than I was making in public accounting.
Right.
I saw that and thought, okay, I'm. But immediately I got there, and I was so used to like general manager of an oil company, cost accountant for Lockheed Martin, public accounting, structured jobs where adults act like adults. Okay.
Right.
And so
Corporate
I go to this doctor's office, and I quickly learned that I felt like I was more like the head ringmaster at a circus.
Yeah.
And so it was the craziest situation.
And they all didn't get along very well.
None of them got along. I mean, how I got the job was they were voting out their executive board and getting rid of their current office manager that they were, accusing of wrongdoing, and going to bring me in the back door. And, it was such a fiasco. I should have ran for the hills, but instead I took the job, and the rest is history. But
let's talk about the history of it, because things started getting weird. And can you kind of lead us into how your world kind of went like, well, I guess I could do that, and then it kind of just continued to get into more of a strange area for you to have this deliberation with yourself, dilemma of, first of all, should I stay or should I go? And should I be even doing this for the guy for this extra stuff on the side and being reimbursed and all that? But how, in your mind, what were you thinking?
So, like I said, we had a lot going on personally. We were in and out of court, custody battle, went on for years and years and years. And, we had a lot of chaos going on in our own life, to be honest. And so I went to work for these doctors, and one doctor in particular, and I did give them different names in my book. And I will tell your listeners, the ones that may not read my book, that's not because I'm protecting them. I just said, this is my story, and you're not going to have a starring role in it. So I gave them names. Honestly, I tried to pick names that went along with their personality. And I know you know that from reading about them thus far. But the one that I named Butch Swan in my book, he was an older gentleman, very, very talented as far as manipulation goes. But he and I kind of got close at first. I felt like a father figure. He even told me, made me believe that. And like I said, I didn't often confide in people about my dad's suicide, but I did confide in him. And he took full advantage of that. Looking back after I got my master's in clinical and mental health counseling, I did realize that he groomed me. That's the term for it. It's called grooming. And he groomed me into believing that we were almost family, and that he was on my side and that he was there for me. And he gave me a lot of special things as he was the president of the executive board. When they voted out the other people, they voted themselves in and hired me. He became the president. When he became the president, he was my boss. He was the person over me. The other doctors did not want to be bothered with day-to-day things unless they got their, little feather up their behind or something. Then they would throw a little fit like they often did, cussing each other, arguing, what have you. But otherwise, they really just didn't want to be bothered with the day-to-day business. So when I came there, it's so hard for me to call him by something else. Dr. Swan, that I named him in my book, he started grooming me right away. I look back and see. Did not, didn't recognize it at the moment. So he started right away asking me to charge things. Him and all the doctors, actually. They didn't have a credit card for the business. So they would ask me to get things on my personal credit card and I would be reimbursed. Not a problem. Most of it was business related, occasionally some personal stuff. But he started getting me to do a lot of personal stuff. And as time went on, it got bigger, more and more, until I had a spreadsheet. I had to keep a spreadsheet of what he owed me. And at
you had to get reimbursed.
One point, I even had to start charging him interest. And so what he would do, it was my job every 2 weeks to give the doctors their settlement statements, is what it was called. It was basically a breakdown of their bills. We kept everything in QuickBooks. They shared some expenses. A lot of expenses they had were just to their own practice. So my job was to compile all that. I didn't have any part of getting those bills. I was just the person that compiled them, put them together, collected checks, put them into the bank account that was a zero, mind you, zero balance bank account, meaning it was an operational account that once they put money in there, I paid their payroll, I paid their bills, paid the payroll taxes, and then theoretically at the end of the month, that should have went back to zero. Now, obviously, because of the way checks clear and timing, it didn't necessarily go to zero, but theoretically, there was no extra money in there. None of their revenues, nothing went in there but what they really owed to someone else. So during that time, I compiled the bills. I would give it to them. They'd write the check. It was just a set up system that I didn't set up. It was there when I got there. But what Dr. Swan started doing, he started taking full advantage of me charging things, and the things he charged were personal. I won't, tell the whole story in my book, but he had a secret life and he was living it up at his lake house with his secret life people. And, a lot of the things I was charging were secret life things. But honestly, I didn't really care. Coming from a public accounting, we saw people that tried to sneak personal things in their business. And, I wasn't his accountant. I was someone working in his office, for a corporation that he was paying into for his bills. And I had a lot going on personally, and I really just didn't care what he did. I'm not a judgmental person. I've never been. I've always been very open and had people that all walks of life that I was friendly with. And I think that's probably one of the reasons I really survived prison was, I just don't judge people. I take people for who they are and I try to love them where they're at. And so, it was easy for me with things going on in my life. And he made it easy too, because he let me come to work at 6 and leave at 3 so I could go pick up the kids and, take them to their sporting events or whatever they had, do homework with them, cook dinner.
Lifestyle benefit. Yeah.
He did. He made it. And at some point in the grooming, he also started telling me the other doctors were against me and he was helping me keep my job. So he planted seeds of, I guess, distrust. He planted seeds of, oh, I'm your hero here. Again, when you look at something in hindsight and from a different lens and a different season in your life, you can certainly see more clear things that at the moment I took for granted and just really honestly didn't think about, to be honest, Brent. I just didn't think about it. I didn't care what he did. But as time went on, I bought more and more things for him. he got slower to paying me, for one. He would always put the money. It was so weird, though. He would put the money in the account with each settlement statement, but he would not pay me until he wanted to pay me all at one time. Well, I looked back later after my criminal case, and I'm like, oh, wait, duh. He had me plug in this stuff to drug expense in the long run. Well, his CPA wasn't going to go for small reimbursements because drugs cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So he had this all figured out from the very beginning. And he liked to brag that he had gotten his last CPA in a lot of trouble, and that guy almost lost his CPA license and had to pay a bunch of back taxes for him and things because this doctor didn't file his taxes for 5 years and then went and blamed it on his CPA. Now, I don't know about you, but your CPA does not file your taxes without your permission, your signature, you reviewing them. So, you know, you have to take information to your CPA for them to even file your taxes. But somehow, with all his power, he got this CPA in trouble. And again, another red flag. When he would tell me these stories, I should have, you know, exited stage left, but instead I stayed. And mainly because honestly, I'm a creature of habit. I did not want to have to change jobs. I didn't want to have to go look for a job. I didn't want to have to start over, you know, all the excuses I told myself.
Yeah.
But
so
at the end
what was the next progression?
Well, at the end of the first year, he came to me, you know, I'd just been putting him to whatever he told me to, but he came to me and had me reclassify him to drug expense. That's the dilemma you referred to earlier. At the time, I sit there for, you know, for days, honestly, but I didn't know what to do. My conscience.
I mean, for those listening that they are watching, the doctor was basically saying, there's all these personal things that I have. I want them reclassified for as drugs that were bought. And so that doesn't look like anything but just part of the business.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I went back and forth with myself for a while. Like I honestly, my book, I refer to it as getting off of God's plan onto man's plan.
You did.
And onto Dr. Swan's plan, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in the end, I just told myself, you know, I'm not his accountant. I'm not going to be doing his taxes. They're going to probably go over this and reclassify stuff. Like
easily rationalized. Yeah.
And I'm not the police. I'm not the accounting police here. And it's not my business what he does. But as we know, that's wrong because it ended up getting me in federal prison, not him. And so, you know, looking back, that was probably really where I think I made a grave error in judgment, and that cost me big, even though I didn't do what the government said I did, and I did not end up getting paid any extra for doing anything for him, because he later lied to save his own self. And I talk about that in my book, how he didn't even really want to be on the witness stand at trial. When I went to trial, I mean, he literally tried everything to evade questions. He got caught lying on the stand. He never came and gave a witness impact statement against me. So, you know, if I'd really done all this, he would have certainly been at court that day when I was sentenced giving this witness impact statement. But he didn't do any of those things. It was obvious he did not want to be there. I'll never forget the other doctor sued my husband and I, by the way, during my first indictment. And I'll never forget during the depositions in that case that they later dropped when they didn't want to answer discovery questions about all their Medicare fraud and all the other frauds they had committed and what really happened, you know, with me charging things. They dismissed that lawsuit against us because they didn't want to answer, you know,
that doesn't happen very often, by the way. That's not a common thing. You were indicted, I think it was like in 2012.
11.
By the way, 11. And you were just explaining before we got on, you know, the shock. Because I think you had left the clinic, the doctor's clinic, within a year that you'd been away and it's another
Not
job
quite
at that
a
point?
year, but it was getting,
And then
it was a while.
and then you get a letter in the mail.
Oh, yes. I got a letter in the
and
mail from Pretrial Services, which is the U.S. Probation Office, telling me that 3 days prior to that, I had actually been indicted in the Eastern District of Arkansas.
And what are they saying you're charged with?
They don't tell you. They just tell you to call their office and make an appointment to come in to get on pretrial, basically probation. As you know from going through the federal system, and I don't know if your listeners know, when you're under federal indictment, your rights are highly restricted. You're literally on probation for a crime you've not been convicted of yet. So you have to turn in your passport. You have to report, I had to report once a month online.
Yep.
They can come to your house. They can go through your things. I mean, they don't normally do that because I wasn't a drug user or doing anything on pretrial that would bring attention for them to think they needed to come to my house. But, they did occasionally. But for the most part, I just reported once a month and that was it. But you are restricted. And some people even have travel restrictions. Now, mine was I just couldn't leave the country. I could go anywhere in the United States. But I've known people that couldn't leave their district.
Stay in the Eastern District of Missouri.
And I've heard of a lot of people that couldn't even leave their district without permission. I didn't have that restriction. But at any rate, you get this letter in the mail and you're like, I've never had any, besides family court, I'm not privy to all this. And so I get this letter and the only thing I knew to do was to go call the person, the attorney. And I'll back up for a minute. As you've already read my book, the reason I left their employment and the reason I do believe they started accusing me of wrongdoing was I was assaulted by one of the doctors during my tenure with them. And when I started putting pressure on them to do something about him, little did I know he had done this to many other people. I had no idea at the time. That came out years later. And that was really shocking to me, but that he had gotten by with it for so long and they took up for him. And he is the only doctor that ended up in federal prison. Of course, nothing to do with my case. He put illegal drugs on the street and ended up in federal prison himself.
They didn't listen to you, Lynn. They stood for him.
Yes. And there was a detective involved and he knew they were lying. And the Arkansas Business paper made a whole big, was reporting on it. It was a big deal. And so this came out though about him and other people between my first and second indictment. But before my first indictment, he did assault me. I will tell your listeners he did not rape me, but he did violate me physically in a way that was inappropriate by touching me physically. And during a treatment in his office, he had been treating a torn rotator cuff I had, and he briefly knocked me out. And I don't even know if I even talk about the extent in my book. I think I just say, because as you can tell, I'm starting to get anxiety right now a little bit just talking about it. I still have trauma from that situation. But I did wake up with him with his private parts rubbing my leg and his hand down my bra. So that's the first time I've ever publicly spoke that. So forgive me if I'm a little shook up right now. But I tried to get the doctors to do something and they wouldn't. So I hired an attorney because the last straw was I was cornered by him in an exam room. Another one of the doctors walked down the hallway that was very aware of what had happened. And I yelled, help me, basically. I said, please help me. And he basically said, as he kept walking, you're on your own. And that day, I went back to my office. They already had a nurse suing them for sexual harassment because of she had been his nurse. She said he felt of her breast and made comments. He had already made a lot of inappropriate comments to me. And by the way, he's the doctor that got me the job. He was the one, I was his accountant in public accounting and had brought me to that job.
Right.
And I looked back too at his grooming, by the way. I overlooked all the things he would say inappropriately to me for I was over almost 2 years. I was already 3 years into this job when he assaulted me. So I had overlooked for 3 years a lot of he would try to like infringe on my personal space, like coming around to my side of the desk. He asked me one time, are those real? But he said, oh, you've got a nice rack. Are those real? Things of that nature that I just tried to laugh off along the way, which honestly, I look back now and I think my life was so chaotic back there then. How was I ever even letting this doctor treat me to start with? Like, sometimes I look back at that part of my life, that season, and I'm like, did I really live that? Is that really my life? Like, because I think about it now and I'm like, I would never let a doctor treat me now that made inappropriate remarks or had a nurse that was already, suing him for harassment for making sexual remarks and touching her inappropriately during an exam. But yet here I was at this season of my life, just, I don't know, just it is what it is. I have no words to explain.
I think it happens though. I mean, I don't probably think it's very uncommon. That's how those things happen. And people end up in those situations and they look back on it, like, how in the world did I let that happen? It was because of the moment and the time and the place somebody was in. But
and so fast forward, I'm trying to put pressure on them to do something. I try to get meetings for months. I finally got an attorney. She was the one representing the nurse because I didn't know anybody else to call. And and she ended up being my attorney that I called the day that I hit the floor when she looked on Pacer and told me I'd been indicted. That was the attorney, same attorney.
Right.
But we finally got a meeting with the new executive board during this time. But for some reason, they got it in their head that there was something fishy going on and he was getting advantage of them paying more bills than him. It was ludicrous. But at any rate, they ousted him as president. So same scenario that happened when I came to their office. They did it all over again. They got behind closed doors against him this time. And, I talk about it. In my book, I say they were having those same behind the closed doors meetings, only I wasn't part of the meeting this time. I was one of the subjects of the meeting. And so they wanted, I think, to fire me. I think looking back at discovering my case, that's how it started, because I was coming to them wanting them to do something about the doctor that assaulted me. And they had already had two doctors, 2 or 3 at this time. I think maybe we were down to 3 had left. So there was only 5 of them left. So their bills had gone up because they were splitting them 8 ways. Now they're, splitting them 5 ways. And so they didn't want to lose another doctor, even though he was a sexual predator, basically. So they decided I would go, I guess, and then they would get rid of the president who they thought was protecting me somehow. And so they ousted him and set out, I believe, from looking at discovery on a plan to figure out how they could fire me legally. So, and, Arkansas is an at-will state. I don't even know why they went through all that, because all they had to do was fire me. But apparently they were getting this, an employer attorney involved and all this. Well, they get to see in the bank statement where he had reimbursed me. And so when we finally get this meeting with them, they start accusing me of wrongdoing. So I immediately tell them, I think you should have an audit. We had a CPA already. I think he should do an audit. I will fully cooperate. What do you want from me? I took him in my office. I showed him all my files, all the financials. I went and took him to this closet that we had. It was stacked to the ceiling, Brent, with financial stuff. I never threw away stuff when I became their office manager. So it went back way before my tenure. And we had moved a few months before that. We had moved. The billers and I had been on a separate floor. So the clinic was like on the 6th floor and we were on the 3rd floor in this big office building. And so it's called the doctor's building. And so we had moved, they wanted to consolidate. So they had moved me up to the clinic and the billers up to the clinic into some other offices. And we had closed down that 3rd floor. So I had to move all those files. We got rid of a storage building. We moved them all upstairs and we put them in that office. So I got the key, I took it, I opened it, I showed them with my attorney present, their attorney, the new president, and me walked over, I showed them all that. Prior to my first, and we asked that they maintain all those records, and we wanted a copy of them because we saw they were falsely accusing me. So we wanted, records to prove.
Right.
So fast forward, a good 8 months after that is when I got the letter that I was indicted. So we went back and forth with them for a little bit. My attorney did. And then we never heard anything. So in my mind, they got the audit. They saw that I was telling the truth. Nothing had happened. I was being reimbursed for stuff I bought for him. He probably had come forward, told him the truth. Everything was fine. I went on with my life, got the letter, and I'm like, oh my God. At the time, I was not being accused of stealing money from them, though, by the way. They were accusing me of, again, helping him have less bills and them have more.
Right.
So this inappropriate that I had, taken money, they thought of that after the fact. So I guess they never got the audit, and they just ended up bringing some guy in to start doing my job that was a employment staffing guy. He was looking for someone to hire, and then he did my job for a while. And I guess the reimbursements to me, by this time, they had turned this over, had made a FBI complaint first. The FBI looked at it and refused to take, the FBI refused to take the case, so they took it to Little Rock PD. And there was a Secret Service back when President Obama appointed a task force to be with local police departments, and he put federal agents in local police departments. When he did that, a young police officer who had just become a Secret Service agent became on the task force with the Little Rock PD, and he had been there roughly 2 months. When my case came across his desk, he later admitted he did no research. He never looked at any invoices. At first, they said I inflated invoices and then stole the money. He later admitted he never even saw an invoice. He never looked at a bank account. He never did anything. He took the doctor's word, went to the grand jury, and indicted me. Well, he went with a prosecutor. He got the AUSA to do it. And so what they didn't know at the time was when those doctors knew I was going to be indicted.
Well, I don't want to skirt over the thing with, when you got that indictment, I mean, it was a huge emotional event, and your husband was out of town, and you told your husband. I mean, what were you guys thinking? Like, what was going through your mind?
I was numb. I remember it's almost like I've almost shut that time out, Brent, because
I want to kind of explain to people, because I'm a little bit ahead. Sometimes when I read, somebody's book, and I don't want to skip over something, because the $611,000 sounds like a big number, but what it was is over a course of years, and it was the reimbursement that you were doing with the doctors of paying on your credit cards. What they were accusing you of was stealing.
Well, he now said that because, and I later found this out through discovery too, they had ousted him as the president, and he was in the dark. He was still calling me, still wanting me to come to work for him. He was going to leave the practice. Like it was, we were still in contact for a while, but finally he just quit calling one day and bugging me about coming back to work for him. And honestly, it was a sigh of relief, because I knew he did not do some things right. All those doctors didn't. And I just didn't want part of that again. But I was, trying to not be ugly, because I still wanted like a reference from him. So, he was in the dark. Looking at the discovery, I realized by the time he found out there was a criminal investigation and the feds were involved, he couldn't come forward and tell the truth, because he would have gotten in trouble for tax fraud, Brent.
Right, for sure. But the thing that I find, the whole thing gets very, it's fascinating, because first of all, that first charge of yours gets dismissed.
Yes.
And That doesn't happen very often at all. I mean, you have to really dig deep to find charges that get dismissed. Oh, that person walked away. No, they then came back with a new charge in that time period. How were you living?
2.5 years later.
How were you living at that time? Being, oh my gosh, I got this thing dismissed. It was a federal indictment. I am now in la la land of that doesn't happen very often at all. So how are you living your life? Are you looking over your shoulder? Or are you like, thank God I got away from all that and I'm moving forward with my life?
Well, not at first. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, but after that indictment, attention kept being brought to it because, again, this nurse was suing and other patients came forward and other nurses that the doctor that assaulted me had assaulted. So this detective got involved and was a state detective and was investigating it. He was going over there. The doctors were taking up for the other doctor in line for him, saying that basically that none of the stuff that I said was true, or I guess any of the other people. There was even drug reps that came forward. He had locked them in his office and talked, terrible to them at times, and like wouldn't let them out. That got scared and told stories about what he did. But at any rate, I moved on. I got a job. At some point, I was out to lunch with a friend, like almost a year. I think I had been unindicted, like it had been dismissed. I'd moved on. It was almost a year later. I see my attorney from that case, his number come up on my phone.
So Lynn, here's the thing. You then, you're out to lunch, you get a phone call. It's your old attorney. You answer the call. What did he say?
So I get this phone call. I'm out to lunch with my friend. But at any rate, he called me. He had a meeting shortly after my first indictment with Pat Harris, and he had showed him my side of the story. He had showed him everything, given the government my case, my defense on a silver platter, Brent. Okay.
Pretty much a proffer of everything.
Well, not really, though, because I wasn't there. My case was already dismissed.
True.
I was no longer indicted. He was just showing Pat, the real criminals here is not my client. They're the ones over there, and so and trying to get my civil money back. At this time, we still had that case pending. So he showed him everything, and this is the one mistake, the flaw, I believe, that my attorney did make. Otherwise, he was such a great attorney for me. He came back on my second indictment for free. He didn't even charge me. He was so mad I got indicted a second time, and he knew I was innocent. But he did tell the government what my defense would be. Okay. Mm-hmm. He showed him in the civil case, we had managed to get one of the doctors that had left. We had managed to get a copy of his settlement statements. And I had tied them all out. Tying out's an accounting term for showing everything adds up and is correct. And I had showed my attorney how there was never a way I inflated anything. What they said in their first indictment, it was not true, and it couldn't have been true. And truthfully, to get $600,011 extra dollars in a zero balance account, there wasn't many ways in that setup it could have happened. So inflation of invoices would have been, a way for that to happen. Or, oftentimes we see people that do steal money. They don't pay payroll taxes, or they pay something over here and they don't pay here, but eventually it catches up.
Right.
But mind you, I'd been gone a long time and no bill was unpaid. And they admitted this on the stand at trial, by the way. When we eventually got to trial in my second indictment, the doctors even had to admit that when I left, there was nothing unpaid. They had no payroll taxes to catch up. They had no bills to catch up. Everything had been paid. So, the question is, had a jury been able to understand where did that money come from? Okay. It had to get in there somehow. Well, because Dr. Swan's settlement statements were destroyed, and he had been putting money in there, there was no way to show it. No way. So, and then the government did something else. I don't know if it was by design or stupidity. But by the time we got to the second indictment to trial and the judge had ruled I could not tell the jury that they had destroyed all that evidence, they said I could use the bank statements. But the problem was the federal government failed to get copies of deposit slips to show who deposited what money. Okay. So when you've got 8 separate entities depositing, and then we're down to, to 7, then we're down to 6, and we're down to 5. And then you don't even have any of the backup documentation to show, okay, his settlement statement was this amount. Here's a deposit for that amount. That must be his deposit. You have nothing to even back into a number. And you're a businessman. You understand where I'm coming from on that. But I had no way using bank statements to show anything. But again, federal judges don't always understand accounting either. And I think that's a big flaw in our system. And actually, one of the reasons I often speak out and advocate for us to go to what I call a professional jury. Meaning, and I know I'm getting a little off track from what we're talking about, but I think it's important for people to consider that if we had professional jurors that aren't just coming off the street and the government has the ability to vote off anybody that understands your case, which is what I saw them doing in my trial. They voted off anyone with accounting experience, finance.
Sure.
They built a house, anything that applied to me, they voted them off the jury and used their strikes to get them gone. But if we had a professional jury pool that understood drug amounts, if it's a drug case, understood conspiracy laws, and understood how maybe that person really didn't do all that just because someone else on their case did it. People that are serving sentences that can't get first step at because of certain drug crimes and gun charges that honestly don't even apply to them. They just apply to the conspiracy as a whole. Or in the case of white collar cases, if you had a jury that understood wire fraud, mail fraud, all the catch-all ones that they use, but also understood accounting, which is a majority of things that comes into play in most white collar cases.
Even in insurance cases, that's what you're dealing with.
So,
did you feel like, Lynn, when you got into that courtroom and you saw the strikes going, very few people go to trial. I mean, 97% of the people that get indicted plea bargain. And then the others that go, it's just a very, very small percentage, especially in federal cases.
And hardly any of them win.
Oh,
Everybody I know that ever went to trial lost.
We have a conviction rate that rivals any of these countries that we say doesn't have a democracy. So the thing that I'm wondering is because I never went to trial, but I always wonder, like, when you walked in there and you saw this thing, because, you're walking in and always, everybody says that you're innocent until proven guilty. But when you walk into a trial in a courtroom, you have the USA versus you. So the USA is the good guy. And regardless of you, you're the bad guy that has to prove that you're the good guy. So they ride on the white horse. And I'm wondering, like, with the jury selection and everything that's going on, how were you feeling? Were you feeling like, this is not, I'm not feeling good about this? Or did you think, no, I've got this?
No, I realized that in the interim, I had fired my first attorney, the one that was working for free. He was going through a bad divorce and just had some other issues going on. And it had just become, too much because I was having to be my own paralegal. A lot of the stuff we wrote, I was having to research the laws and find them and write it. And, well,
and a lot of attorneys don't go to trial. So, the fact that there aren't very many cases that go to trial means that a lot of attorneys, they will talk about going to trial, but actually doing the work that actually goes into preparing a case is humongous, especially in the federal system. So you're
especially when they keep giving you the same discovery over and over, like they did in my case, but they label it different. Like, the government uses what's called Bates numbers, and that's a number for a document. But because my case went on, by the time I got to trial in 2017, my case had been ongoing for 6 years off and on, between the first and second indictment. And we had gotten this discovery hundreds of times. In fact, I was indicted the second time they said I did all this stuff in QuickBooks that QuickBooks wouldn't even do, first and foremost. But secondly, they couldn't even find the copy of QuickBooks. And finally they found a copy, but then they had to come over and hack into it. They gave us copies that people had worked in after I left the clinic. Like, it was crazy. The Secret Service was given the actual flash drive from my computer before it was destroyed. He got it. And he lost it.
Well, I want to get inside your head because this whole thing is going on. In this case, the jury comes out after the closing statements, and you're sitting there just like you see in the movie. And what happens?
Well, first of all, the AUSA gets to give the first opening statement to the jury. And it was, if I wouldn't have been the one on trial, it was so fascinating because she tells this story to the jury. Well, this is when we were in Verdar and we were picking a jury. She tells the jury this story about Cheetos. And there's two children sitting at a table and they're eating Cheetos. Or, well, they're not supposed to eat the Cheetos. Their mom tells them, do not eat the Cheetos, and leaves the room. But the two kids eat the Cheetos anyway, right? Well, the mom comes back and the Cheetos have been eaten. And one kid has Cheeto dust. You know, Cheetos leave all that dust on your fingers, has Cheeto dust. And she asked the people in the jury, that prospective jury, to raise their hand if they believe that the kid with the Cheeto dust is the guilty party for eating the Cheetos, okay? So all these people's hands go up, and there was a few that didn't. Well, the ones that didn't, they asked more questions too, because see, the ones that didn't are free thinkers. They're outside the box. They're not going to just believe something just because you show them.
Yeah, there could be another story.
Absolutely.
Right?
And those people were immediately voted off the jury. Okay. So we finally, everybody that said they had accounting experience, we voted for them to stay on because I wanted people to understand my case because I knew I was innocent. However, when we get back to find out who made it to the jury, mind you, all those people had been X'd off by the government. So I'm left with like a school teacher, housewife, like people that worked in aeronautics. One of them did things that didn't apply to my case at all. So it's not a jury of your peers because those aren't my peers because they don't know anything about accounting. And my case is all about financial fraud. So we start the first day. The first day that happens, Verdar, they give the jury like some kind of little instruction things. And then they let us have opening statements. So the AUSA gets up, she gives her opening statement. You know, the government packs the courtroom behind her. All these agents are sitting at the table with them already. You've got all the other AUSAs from their office. Because mind you, they don't go to trial much. So they'll just schedule to come in there that day.
Right.
They're all back there. I'm sitting there with a couple of people on my side. So I don't know how that looks to a jury. Like they've got all the people in the world, you know, like a whole crowd. Plus, not to mention local reporters, they get to come to tell their side of the story to the public while you're under trial, by the way. So she gets through with her opening statement and she walks back and high fives other AUSAs. I'm sitting there honestly appalled. This is my government. This is my taxpayer dollars. No matter that I'm the one on trial, I paid for you to have that job and to be professional. And you're the government, for God's sake. And you can tell I'm getting a little angry here because sometimes when I talk about my case, I do still have that trauma that comes back and I do get a little angry. So I apologize to your listeners if I'm getting a little vocal here. But anyway, I whispered to my attorney, I'm like, how can the judge allow that? Like, this is not a circus. This is not a basketball game. This is my life. Like, she's high-fiving someone, but this is my life. Right. He's like, just don't worry about it. That's what he tells me. Don't worry about it.
How long does this trial last?
8 days, which is a short trial, really.
I'll ask you again because after this 8 days, you've gone through this horrendous experience. The jury comes back in, stand up, they say guilty. What's going through Lynn's mind?
But I still somehow, in all my disbelief back then, that trials were fair, that our system was a fair system, that innocent people did not go to prison, I guess somehow I convinced myself that the jury would see the truth in the end and I would just go home.
I had hope.
But the day that they came back in, the one juror, she was crying. None of the rest of them would look at me, and I took that as a bad sign, I'll be honest. $611,000. So I had a $611,000, $207,000 for tax fraud, they said was owed on that money. And then the money laundering charges just gets you extra time in prison. So that's why they added those. So they had to read off every count, So count 1, wire fraud, guilty. As soon as they said that, I laid my head down on the desk. I didn't cry. I had no emotion. I felt totally numb. I remember just feeling hot all over. I heard my husband crying behind me. I heard him sniffling, and the attorney friend of ours that was sitting there with him, who was just a personal friend of ours who was there that day. I could also hear her crying because they were the two people directly right behind me in chairs in, the little, I guess, galley area, whatever you would call people that are spectators.
Sure.
They continued to read each count. Each count, they said guilty. Then she dismissed the jury, thanked them for their service. They left. And then I raised my head up and she told me basically she was going to let me stay out on I was out on my own recognizance. I didn't have a bond. Both times I was just left out.
Which is fantastic because a lot of people can get remanded that I've had here on the show and thought that they were going home, and they were immediately handcuffed.
Right. I've seen that with some people I've helped. I just saw that here this week with somebody that's on a page that I get on and try to help people with.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I was immediately told I had to go back up to the marshal's office. So mind you, the marshal has taken my fingerprints, DNA, and pictures. First indictment, when I was indicted the second time, when I was found guilty, I was indicted. I was taken up again. They do the whole thing again. And when I was sentenced, they made me go back up there. I'm like, do y'all think this stuff's changing? Whatever. I'm having to come up here all these times.
How much time did you have, Lynn, between the time that you found that you were guilty and
So I was found guilty on February the 8th of 2017. And I reported to FPC Bryan Federal Prison on February the 26th, 2018, over a year later.
Wow.
So she tells me go back up to the marshal. We go back up there. And then my husband and I start heading home. My husband's driving. I'm on the phone telling my mother and my sister, by the way, I just got found guilty of all counts. Like, I literally just got convicted of this crime. And they're like, oh my God, well, we're going to appeal, you can appeal, tell me stuff that I didn't even care to hear at that moment because nothing mattered at that moment, except for the fact that I had just got convicted of a crime I knew I hadn't committed. And I had fought for 7 years and we had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So did the kids have a lot of questions? Or did they just accept the situation as bad as it was, as horrible as it was, as a family? We're going to get through it.
I remember them just loving on me and telling me, they were there for me and that they loved me.
Yeah.
So, it was a horrible day. And then I spent 4 days in bed, wallowing in my pain.
Yeah.
People calling me, wanting to bring food, wanting to talk to me.
Yeah.
I'm just like, no. I really just want to be this person that's wallowing in my pain right now. I just need to do this.
Yep. That's a weird time period because I had 2 or 3 months, and that's like that dead period because you almost know, once you know that you're going to prison, you want to get in and get it over with. You have this weird, strange thing of, having this no man's land of and the fear of going in. So that's a long time to wait.
Well, my attorney told me to gather character reference letters. And because I didn't know what to say to people, I just said, can you write me a character reference letter? So I ended up amassing 165 character reference letters, which
a lot of letters.
Is unheard of. And my attorney only wanted 10. But, everybody that asked, I just said, you can write a letter if you want to. Mind you, not everybody that asked wrote a letter. I'd say probably a third of the people.
165 letters is a lot of letters.
So, but I was adamant that the judge would see all those because people took their time out of their life to write a letter for me who was convicted of a crime. And I felt it very important. And mind you, some of these people were people I'd known from college, high school. I'm in my 50s. So, I've known people a long time. And so
it's a strange thing too, Lynn, when you, and I think you can only really go through it when somebody has these character letters written when you're going to prison. It's almost like the Tom Sawyer thing where you're sitting at your own funeral and you really get to hear what people think of you or how you've had these different experiences in your life and how that.
Absolutely.
And it's a strange, very, very strange. And I took my letters with me to prison because I wanted to look at it when I had a bad day.
So I gathered all these letters. She talked about those letters. I can't tell you how many times. And she put off my sentencing at the end of that hearing that day and said she couldn't make a decision right then. She wanted to think about it longer. So 2 more months later, it was set. And she gave me a 2-level variance based on my character reference letters. Now, my pastor came and spoke on my behalf. Several other people came and actually got on the stand and were witnesses for me at my sentencing. One had several good people come and speak on my behalf to tell the person I was.
Oh, good.
So I stood there. She gave me a 2-level variance. She only, and I say only, sentenced me to 45 months. Now, understandably, to someone in your listening audience, 45 months, they're like, oh my God, what do you mean only?
Yeah,
but when the government is trying to get 8 to 13 years, and then you're really looking at more like 60 to 70 months, and you get about half that time, honestly, it felt like only.
Yeah.
It did. And that was another surreal day of going back up to the marshal's office and then driving home with my husband and seeing myself on the news that night.
I want to take a break right there because I want to get back. I want to get into your next journey of going to prison. Before we do that, I want to recognize the Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. And like I said, Lynn and I are both part of that White Collar Support Group. And I can tell you that this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific, or for information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. Okay, so Lynn, it all happens. You've gone through this whole journey. Now, you get to go to prison, and you're voluntarily surrendering. Walk us through that whole mind of what happened.
Well, the first thing I get from the U.S. Marshals finally tells me to surrender to them. Well, I had done so much research, Brent. I knew better. I was like, oh no, I'll be held in counties. I'll be moved around, and my security level will be higher just because I didn't walk in that door. And judges don't often know this. I think she thought she was maybe doing a favor by just, me not having to pay to go all the way to Texas. Because I had asked at trial or at sentencing, she had asked where I wanted to go. And I had done a lot of research. I just said Texas, because I just thought it was one of the closer ones to women are housed really a lot further from home. I was 8 hours from my home. There's the other one closer was only 10 minutes. And it did, after researching, I felt like Texas would be more to do. It was a standalone camp for one, didn't have, like men's facility attached or any of the higher, like a FCI or any higher level securities. It was just a standalone camp. And it looked like it had like a lot of things to do. And I'm a person that stays busy and I like to stay busy. So I knew time would pass slower if I wasn't busy. So I decided to ask for Texas. So anyway, we went and filed a motion and she did court order I could self-surrender. So on the of course, leading up to it is all torture to yourself. You're like, I was blogging. I was telling my story. I was, doing everything I could to prepare myself.
Which is something you did throughout.
I did. That blog really turned into way more than I ever thought it would, but we'll get to that in a minute, I guess. So anyway, I was preparing, but I was very depressed. I'm not gonna lie. I stayed in bed a lot. We had two little French bulldogs at the time, and one of them, Olivia, she was very attached to me, and it was nothing for me and her to be in bed most all day. I'm telling you, it was a bad time.
Yeah, it's depressing.
I look back and look at all the time I wasted doing that. And I tell people I help now, don't be me. And I hope my book, I do say at the beginning of it, it is kind of a cautionary tale, because I don't want people to repeat my same journey in some of the things, like, for instance.
That's the one thing about going through one of these journeys, is you can talk about the things and when things happen and what you could have done. Or
I knew I had to report to prison the next day. So my husband and I flew on a plane to Bryan, Texas. Well, we flew to College Station, where Texas A&M is. That's where the airport is. We caught an Uber that we had take us to a restaurant. We stayed there for a few hours, and I couldn't take it anymore. I'm like, I'm just ready to do it. I can't have this held over my head for another minute. I'm going to go self-surrender 2 or 3 hours early.
Yep.
So we call another Uber, and that was another surreal ride. I almost put the guy's picture in my book because he let me take his picture, and I told him I was going to put it in a book because he's asking us, wait, there's a prison here? I didn't know there was a prison here. And we're like, yeah, there's a federal prison here.
Oh, we had an Uber there.
Oh, yeah, we're in an Uber. And then he's like, well, do y'all work there? No, we don't work there. And then he's like, well, y'all going to visit somebody? So I finally have to tell him, no, dude, you're about to drop me off. I'm going to walk into that prison and self-surrender. And guess what? You're going to take my husband back to the airport, and he's going to fly back to Arkansas by himself, okay? And we had flown because I did not want my husband on the road 8 hours after dropping me off, because I knew. And he told me he had a panic attack and a meltdown at the Houston airport halfway back home, So I'm glad we did it that way. So he flew me. I had a one-way ticket. He had a round trip, And we pull up to the prison. And there's a phone out there. There's like, the arm is down. I see people in khakis working on flowers, and I assume that they're other prisoners. But we pull up there in the Uber, and the Uber guy picks up the phone and says, I'm dropping someone off. And, of course, this voice comes over the phone, yells at us, back up, park in that space. Don't get out of the car. Only the person coming in get out. And, and I'm like, oh,
it's intimidating.
So I give my husband my phone, and I hadn't brought a purse because I didn't want him to have to carry a purse back on the airplane, but I brought like this tote bag that you could just fold up and stick in anything, just one of those kind you get at a grocery store or something. And my phone, and I give it to him quickly. And so our goodbye was like, so quick. I hadn't even kissed him, and out the car I went. Well, then I made the fatal mistake. I tried to stop and talk to those people there working on flowers. Brian has a horticulture, and these people, it's the prisoners that work it, and they get a certificate, like a master gardener certificate, but they keep the compound looking really pretty. Brian has a compound equivalent to maybe a private college compound. It is a nice compound as far as trees and plants, but that's because the prisoners.
There's horticulturists,
So
all the prisoners are doing it.
To ask them questions, because you want to know what you're, and this voice gets on the loudspeaker from up the hill and yells at me to get up there. So I go up there. She goes, "Where's your ID?" I'm like, I didn't bring anything. All I brought was a piece of paper that had my picture on it from the marshal's office telling me to be there that day. And so she starts quizzing me. What's your maiden name? What's your date of birth? What, all this stuff, and I'm like thinking in my head.
I was so rattled, Lynn, I couldn't remember my Social Security number.
Well, she's asking me all these things.
That's how rattled I was. He said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "Are you kidding me? Are you messing with me?" And I said, "I'm sorry." I said, give me a second. And I finally, but it was like I was just so rattled by standing in this cage and this person shouting down at me.
Oh, I was inside. She was inside. There was a window. I'm standing outside, and it's where you go to visitation, but there's a separate part that's like the operations office or whatever, where people, there's always a guard up there. But at any rate, she's yelling at these questions to me, and I'm thinking in my head, and it's comical now, but at the time I was so disturbed by it. I'm like, wait, do people often self-surrender to somebody? It's like, wait, you're telling me I could have paid somebody to come here and answer all these questions and service? Like, who knew, And I'm thinking, and then she orders me to sit down in this fold-down chair, like a little, just metal chair. And it had water in it. It had been raining that day. And I'm like, so I'm sitting on the edge of it, trying to do what she said and, not get wet. And so I'm sitting there, and then the lady from R&D across the street comes over with her prisoner helper. And as she comes over and starts berating me with the same line of questioning again to me to prove I'm actually who I say I am coming to prison, the prisoner behind her is going, she's mouthing to me, it's going to be okay. And so at that point, tears start. I'm trying to fight back tears, this time because, I'm trying to keep from getting wet. I'm being berated with questions. And my husband many, many years has just drove away, and I don't know when I'm seeing him again. And I'm walking into prison, obviously. Yes. So I'm very emotional. I start fighting back tears and, a few drop down, but I was trying hard to be strong. We go across the way and, you fill out paperwork saying who your family is and some of the, just, what glasses you brought. You have a wedding band, all the things. But then she took my Bible from me that I was told I could bring. And that's when the floodgates opened. And let me tell you, I cried for hours after that. I mean, in my picture on my ID, it's in my book. I'm so red-eyed and just, it's, and I'll be honest, I cried off and on for several days when I first heard my husband's voice, just.
Yeah, because your emotions are right on your sleeve.
Absolutely.
Well, so within all this going on, you eventually get, put into population. And I think one of my biggest surprises was, I joke about this a lot, that I thought, standing at the gate of Leavenworth, I thought, well, let's see, I'll get stabbed, and then maybe I'll get in a fight, and then maybe I get raped. And what my biggest surprise was is how many people wanted to help me get set up.
I had the walk of shame because they give you a bedroll after you go through.
Oh, yeah.
And, you do the dreaded strips.
Everybody looks at you.
You get your clothes, and they're not the normal clothes. They're like some kind of temporary outfit. And
right, you're the new person.
Blue shoes. You go to medical. They stab your arm for a TB test that you got to come back for. And at this time, I was still real leery of men. Absolutely. So, you get your bedroll and you're walking through the whole compound with it. And of course, everybody's looking at the new girl because you got the blue temporary shoes on. You've got the khaki scrub suit. That's not what you normally wear, although you do wear khaki men's outfit at Bryant. They don't have the green ones like women wear. We did have khakis, but it was the button-up shirt, the t-shirt, the pants, and you had your own shoes or boots. But when you're a newbie, you've got on the V-neck, so big on me, it looked like pajamas. I mean, I was having to hold the pants up almost, and just had to roll them down at the top, trying to keep them on. Walking in these tennis shoes that had holes in them that were blue, that were all worn out, but they've been washed so many times, your toes are even hurting in them. And it was cold, no jacket, so I'm walking through. But the one good thing about women's prisons, I don't know if all do it, but I know some do it. They have what's called a big sister program. So when you get there, you're took under the wing of somebody that's already been there for a minute. That's a big sister. There's like 3 or 4 of them in a unit. And so they show you how to make your bed. I had somebody come bring me shower shoes. Another person brought me a toothbrush.
Shower shoes are absolutely essential.
Oh, absolutely. You don't want your feet on whatever's on the, okay. Yeah. So anyway, people do what I call come to your rescue, and they're very kind. The very people that, and I wrote about this in my book as well, going there, I thought, how can I live with these criminals? These are criminals. Right. What am I going to do? I've got to live for years with criminals. But it was these very criminals that came to my aid and made me feel okay, even though I was crying, even though I wasn't okay. But they came to my aid. And honestly, some of those women are still some of my best friends to this day. And I started teaching classes in the unit on self-esteem, value, worth. I had my husband send me in books that I could read stuff out of, other people's stories, to show women
Awesome.
that they were valuable, that
Mhm.
they were important, that the traumas they had been through did not define them, and that they were worthy of going back out and making a good life for themselves, because many
Mhm.
had just been beaten down. They had been domestically
Well,
abused.
that had to fill you up, Lynn. You know, doing something like that inside prison and making people feel a certain way about their self-esteem, and hopefully trying to look at the positives that they could focus on to try to enter back into their world.
One of the best times I had in prison was working in Reentry. In fact, Elizabeth Holmes, I hear, has my job now that I had there. But
well, you've been on TV a few times talking about that,
yeah,
Elizabeth Holmes.
yeah, I got hit up a lot when she was going there. But at any rate, I was making resumes, helping women, teaching them how to dress for success and things. I really enjoyed that time. I really talk about it in my book too. It was a time of healing for me in a way. I started letting go of some of the anger I'd held on to. And it was a good space for me during my time in prison. However,
how did you end up in the hole, in the shoe, in there?
Oh, I got thrown at the camp. They had a shoe.
Because I know you were in Oklahoma, but how did it happen to you in the camp?
Well, okay, so in Bryan, you know, I like I said, my blog ended up turning into more. I left Reentry and went to cosmetology class. I was one of the 25 women picked to go to cosmetology. And truthfully, I'll be honest, the head of education wanted me out of education because they were doing so much corrupt things, and I was too busy blogging about all the corruption there. And so I had been written a couple of false shots and beat them for writing blogs. And I went to cosmetology, and shortly into cosmetology.
Well, when you're saying you're writing blogs, you weren't writing the blogs inside the prison for them. Your blogs were going outside into the world.
Oh, they were being posted on my website, my blog, inside the walls.
Right.
And I was mailing them through core links to my friend, Kathy, who was posting them for me onto my blog. Now, mind you, my blog started out a way with me to be therapeutic, talk about my case. Then I got to prison and I started talking about things like the food.
You became an advocate.
Just the atmosphere thing, nothing to do with guards, nothing to do with, you know, just my journey. But at some point that turned and I began to be an advocate inside those walls. And the turning point for me, I turned a blind eye to a lot of stuff along the way, but I quit Reentry to go to cosmetology. I was, you know, I interviewed and got picked. And I got in class because like I told you, I like to be busy. I've always had an interest in that, but I never went because I had other degrees and, you know, I never was going to practice it, but it was nice to have something to learn while there. So I got in cosmetology, and probably a month into that class, I was faced with a huge dilemma. Kind of sort of like the dilemma I was faced with Dr. Swan in the QuickBooks. Okay. So I was asked to sign fraudulent paperwork that would have said I got hours that I had not got for cosmetology class. And I told the lady, our teacher, our instructor, I said, Miss Kersey, I can't do that. Do you not know what I'm here for? I'm already serving time for fraud that I didn't commit. I can't, in good conscience, sign this paperwork because, number one, the federal prison is getting a grant for this program. That's why it's free to me. Number two, you're uploading these hours to the state of Texas, to the Revenue Department, or the Department of Labor and Revenue that in Texas. And I fear that's a state fraud. And I'm not going to be part of that. I can't in good conscience.
What was her response?
She told me, well, that's how this class works, and you're going to have to do that. And I was like, huh? So then I go back to the unit, and we had gotten something when we started cosmetology class from the Department of Labor, Texas. And so I go and I read the whole thing again. And I'm like, nope, right here. It says only hours that you're in class are supposed to be reported. So I knew I was right because I wanted to make sure I was even right. I thought, well, maybe in prison it's a little different or something.
Maybe you got prison hours.
I mean, everything's different in prison. Why not that? So I go and find the head of education on the compound the next day. And I said, Miss Valentine, I need to talk to you about something. Here, I thought maybe she didn't know. I said, here's what I'm being asked to do, and I think this is fraud. She said, well, I don't think you're cut out for these classes. I'm like, what? So less than a week later, maybe 2 days, I get called. She comes to my unit. I get called, hey, Miss Valentine's here looking for you. She comes up to my room. I'm at my locker, and she tells me she's removed me from cosmetology because medical says that my torn rotator cuff, mind you, this is now 2018. No, 18. And I've had a torn rotator cuff since 2009, okay? So 9 years into this rotator cuff, she all of a sudden says, medical says, I'm not to raise my arm over my shoulder and do Cosmo. I'm like, yeah, how convenient y'all got together and tried to cook this little deal up. And she tells me she's removed me. So the next day I go over to education after I thought about it that night. And I told her, Miss Valentine, I'm going to give you a chance to put me back in my classes. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you do not, I will write this up using the administrative remedy, which is the grievance policy, for people in prison. And I will fight it all the way to DC. And I'm going to expose the fraud here in Cosmo. And I'm going to write it up, and I will not back down. She goes, do what you got to do, because the thought is that no prisoner is going to do that, because nobody wants that kind of retaliation. And I went to the warden on what's called mainline, which is, the noon meal. And I told her, I had been emailing her and she hadn't answered. And I said, you need to put me back in my class before I go any further with this, because not only am I going to write up the fraud going on in there, but I've been turning a blind eye to a whole lot of things that y'all commit fraud. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing 3 things a day that y'all do wrong at this prison. And I'm going to make y'all fix everything you do wrong here if you don't put me back in my class, because I don't have anything else to do. And so I'm going to make good of my time. I'm going to be in the law library. I'm going to be learning policy. And it's not going to turn out well, because I will write everything up. And I'm serious. And she kind of dismissed me at first. But after a while, I kind of became their source for the bad doings on the compound, like with PREA violations, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, where our chaplain and even our captain was having sex with inmates. And I kind of got respect from people who were actual staff there that did the right thing. They would come to me in private and go, Espejo, I didn't tell you this, but I am laughing. Oh my gosh, you keep doing what you're doing. Like, oh my gosh, I beat 3 false shots they wrote trying to make me quit. They threw me in their Brian shoe multiple times, told me they were going to ship me off the compound. One time they even took me to medical, had them examine me to saying they were shipping me, really trying to, make me believe it, right? So they, would put me in that shoe. I think they could hold you there like 3 hours, or then they really had to take you to the real shoe.
Lynn, they put you in the shoe because they were retaliating against you.
Yes, they were bullying me.
Putting out information.
Yes.
So
yes.
let's go into, because you were not yet in COVID, and that didn't happen because you had this whole other blog thing that happens when you get out. But when you start getting close to the door, because you're thinking you're going to get a furlough to go to another prison.
Well, I had gotten tired of the retaliation at Brian, and I told
you. Right, I understand. No, I understand. But how much time did you have left when you wanted to get closer to home?
Well, I'd already been in prison for 2 months or 2 years. And I only had I was going that year to home confinement, probably in maybe 8 months, 9 months. And I'd already had my home confinement stuff signed and everything, my
Right.
halfway house home confinement.
So you're only months away.
Mhm.
They tell you that they're going to grant you a transfer, but when do you find out that this transfer is further away from where you had asked?
So they had agreed that I could furlough.
So they think they're going to give you a little diesel therapy. When you get the transfer.
Mm-hmm. I just called on the loudspeaker.
Do you have any idea? Because they usually don't tell you anything.
No.
So what happened?
They called me on the loudspeaker. I went over to the officer station. He said, pack your bags. You're being transferred. Well, I had told them, I had got them to agree I could take a furlough transfer. It was 50 miles up the road. I wanted to go to Carswell. My friend Retta had left Brian and went to Carswell, and she wrote my husband a letter and said, tell Lynn to come up here. It's so laid back. She needs some peace. Tell her to come up here. So I put in to go there, and I made sure I could take a furlough. I didn't want to, get shipped the other way, because you might end up through counties and all kinds of things. So anyway, they agreed to it. However, the warden, who had now become kind of, I'd become someone that she trusted and knew I'd been telling the truth about a lot of stuff. Because I'd gotten back in Cosmo, by the way. I fought them and got back in the classes. But by now, I had become kind of trusted by some staff. And so she was going to let me go to Carswell, and she had actually agreed it would be that way. But she went on leave. And the captain, who was also having sex with inmates, and I was getting close on his tail about it, making reports, and he knew he was next, probably because I hadn't found out he was yet. I knew about the chaplain and others, but the last time I was in the SHU at Brian, he called me into his office, and he was like, you need to stop this. They were trying to intimidate me. They had a psychologist in there trying to intimidate me, trying to get me to non-report, all this stuff. And I held firm. I said, I don't care. You can say what you want. I'm still going to report this. And so he was in charge. And
he's the one that sent you
yes.
off into Aliceville.
Yes.
Okay.
So he made it to where I was going to Aliceville. So I had to pack my stuff up, get on a bus. They bus you to Houston. You catch Marshall Air Flight there. You're shackled, handcuffed, belly chained. It's freezing cold winter. You don't have a jacket. Everybody else is bundled up like the marshals, the BOP employees, and you're just like shaking on the tarmac, and you're out there standing for, probably 45 minutes before you get on the plane, because the men are in the back of the plane, the women are in the front. So they have to make sure they orchestrate all that, because they don't want women walking by men, to get on the plane, because, there's some bad people on those planes. It's all levels of security. There's murder. There's people that are serving life sometimes that are being moved around for some reason or another. And so they keep you, even though you may be sitting next to a murderer that's a woman, you're not going to be by the men that have done things.
Right.
And I'm sure for not only security reasons, for probably sexual, misconduct reasons and things.
Right.
But at any rate, so you get on the plane and you're shackled, handcuffed and all that, and you're flying, I'm flying to Oklahoma. You fly into what I call the basement of the prison, like the bowels of the prison, just open up and take the plane in. And that's when the marshals get on the speaker and they say, thanks for flying Con Air today. Please come back soon. And you're like thinking, oh. So we get off and you're, once you get into the transfer center, they take off the shackles, chains, belly chains, all that stuff. And they threw all the women in a holding cell that was the nastiest thing I've ever seen, probably besides the county jail. So nasty, you didn't want to touch anything. It had a toilet in the middle, open in view, no toilet paper, nothing to wash your hands with, water, but no soap, no nothing. And they just throw 13 women. They just keep getting off Con Air flights and getting in there with us. And we're in that holding facility till like almost 2:00 in the morning, because they check in 350 men ahead of us, because men will riot and you don't lock them up like that. You're doing something for them. They brought us food. We had no way to wash our hands. We had nothing to drink with it. Brought us nothing to drink with bologna sandwiches. COVID hit. And March the 13th, 2020 hit, and the entire BOP nationwide shut down. And I was locked in a cell by myself. Now, this was not the SHU. I heard when you opened, when you opened your
it was a
podcast.
cell.
I did end up my last 14 days in the men's max security SHU, but during I was in isolation because we weren't really getting out, and I was in the cell by myself for roughly 100 days.
So long.
And during that 100 days, when I came home, my skin hung on my body. You don't get any movement. You're locked in. You have I had what was called fluorescent pallor, which you look gray. You look like a dead person. Like when I looked in the mirror, when my husband
you weren't
picked
getting
me up,
sun or any light.
Right. You're
I had a friend of mine that was in for 16 months in county jail, never been outside, and he looked gray.
And it's called, I looked it up when I got home. It's called fluorescent pallor. It has a name. And so I had no natural light for the whole 3 months I was in Oklahoma because
what was going through your mind?
You know,
and then with COVID, did you think you were getting out, or did you think you were getting released?
Well, the CARES Act wasn't to be at first. When we first were locked down,
I know. So I mean, what was the common with COVID and all this stuff going on? What were people thinking?
We didn't get masks until a couple months in it. You know, we saw some guards wearing some masks. And I will say this, you know, another thing I laughed about in my book, I did see a couple of people that made a mask out of a sports bra. I was like, oh, that's ingenious, but I'm not sure that's really going to help you because is that thing protective? I mean, you know, but you got to give people credit in prison. They make something out of nothing.
Innovative.
I mean, I made an ice chest so I could get some ice slid under the door from people that were allowed out in the unit. I made an ice chest out of the sticky parts of women's hygiene pads, the styrofoam containers our meals were brought in, and a trash bag. And I stuck it together, made a square, and had one of them was a lid, and I made an ice chest for my room while I was in Oklahoma. So you do things to survive, and you figure it out. And
it's amazing what you can adapt to, because you would never have thought that you'd be able to go to the Oklahoma Transfer Center. You'd be put in a cell by yourself, and then eventually you'd be in the men's wing.
With being present.
When did you start thinking? Did you have any communication with anybody about what was going to happen next? Well,
because I was a member of the FAMS email, Brandon Sample. There's another guy. I'm trying to think of his name, but there was like some actual people that mailed stuff into prisons you could sign up for. And I'd always been on that. Lisa Legal was another one. And I saw that the CARES Act had been passed. And I'm like, I qualify for that. I'm almost home anyway. Like, I got out 5.5 months early on it, but I was almost to the end of my sentence. I'd already served the majority of it. And so I was shot free. I was low security. In fact, when I got to Oklahoma, the lady couldn't even believe I was there. She's like, why are you here? Wait, you rode Con Air? I've never seen someone with 2 security points come to this facility. Like, she was like, this is her exact words. Who did you off, like the B word. I'm not going to say it on your family show, but, she asked me who I'd ticked off basically. And so, I was the policy girl, remember? So during the time we're locked down, the guards are leaving us and going to the men's facility. And we have what's called panic buttons in those cells. And we had a lot of women that were real sick. We had women that repeatedly were having seizures. We had a pregnant woman that her placenta was detaching. And we had women that were old with heart conditions that were walking on walkers. So we had people that when that button would be pushed, it could have been a life and death situation. Okay.
Sure.
So that was my first thing I got a BP-8 and wrote them up for. So I wrote up the guard for leaving our unit for hours at a time, and I documented it. I had a clock outside my room I could see, and I documented how long he would go and leave and how long the button would be pushed. I didn't know how long he was gone, but I knew how long he wasn't there answering that button because he wasn't in the unit. You could hear him coming back in too, and then he'd go answer the button. But at one point, I wrote him up. It was 56 minutes. So someone could have died in 56 minutes, mind you. So I wrote him up, and SIA came to see me, which is the SIS is for investigation of prisoners. SIA investigates staff. So they came and talked to me and had me sign an affidavit about it. I actually signed an affidavit about this guy leaving, and he was under investigation, and he would come give me some dirty looks, but I didn't care. By this time, I'd already had so much retaliation. There was nothing they could do to me, at Oklahoma to retaliate. So anyway, that was my first write-up there. Then the second write-up I did, we went weeks with no blankets, no sheets, no change of clothes. We were in the same outfit for weeks. Unhygienic things. And I wrote them up. Of course, that day, here comes all the stuff I wrote them up for, and we got that. And during this time, I was also called out by SIA. So people are seeing me constantly go out to talk to SIA because I had, while at Bryan, reported to Senator Bozeman's office and anybody else that would listen.
And when did you find out you were leaving Oklahoma?
Well, they were letting men out on the cares. And I kept asking the staff that would come by occasionally, why are you not letting women out? We're all most of us are camp status. Most of us are in transfer to somewhere. Why are you not letting women out? And they're like, we just don't have the manpower to do that. Women are going to have to go to the next facility. I'm like, no, that's not what the law says.
So, but Lynn, I don't even know, what does that mean? Because you're getting out on the CARES Act in Oklahoma. How does your family get notified? How do you leave? How are you released? How does that happen there?
So the first time my husband came to pick me up, the night before, the marshals showed up and took me to the SHU. And they took me to the SHU and said I hadn't been quarantined correctly. Mind you, I'd already been in a cell for 100 days by myself, okay?
Right.
Really? What more is there to quarantine? And so my husband shows up and they had to tell him that they weren't letting me leave. So they told him they'd have to give me another date and I'd have to let him know. So for 2 days, I couldn't even call him because I'm in the SHU. And they only bring a phone around every so many days. And it's a phone on this stand that rolls. And they hand you the receiver through the hole in the door. When I finally got my husband, 2 days after he had come and he told me what they said to him, that they had not quarantined us and all that. And so I got another date. And I let him know, be here on this date. And I asked. I said, are you sure this is the date? I cannot have my husband drive 5 hours again, be turned away. This is traumatizing to people. And they told me yes. That day came, believe it or not, Brent, they turned my husband away again because I knew it was only 13 days of quarantine. But I asked, are you sure this is the date? This is the date. You're sure, May 27th? Yes. So when they didn't let him pick me up that time, I had already worked hard in Oklahoma to resolve the anger. I didn't want to go home, the angry person. I left and went to prison and that carried me through prison.
How did you react to this? They told you that it was the date.
Hot anger came back over me. And I describe in my book, I could literally feel it start at the top of my head, hot, and wash my entire body. And I started tearing up that cell. I was throwing everything off the bunk. I was throwing things. I was hollering and screaming. I'm about to tear this place up. I told them I'm fixing to file a lawsuit. I've been in a SHU with men. I know my rights. I know policy. I started going ballistic. And
you threw a fit, went angry. What happened? Did you get out the next day?
The doctor came back. She goes, Miss Espejo, I need you to calm down. And I need you to give me your husband's cell phone number. Okay. I want you to know I'm working. She was very calm. She said, I'm working to get you out of here today. I'm aware of what's going on. I promise you I'm advocating for you. This is not right. And I'm doing everything I can, but I need you to remain calm. I gave her Poncho's cell phone number. I got my Bible out. I sit back down on that bunk. I picked everything up, put it back, sit back down, and I just started praying, God, I don't know what's about to happen, but please give me the peace I had before I lost it again. And I just started praying, and just peace just washed over me. And not long after that, the person I knew to be the CMC, he came to my door and he told me, gather your stuff. He didn't handcuff me. He didn't do anything. We got in an elevator. I knew I was going home. It was so surreal. And we went down to the bowels of the Oklahoma Transfer Center where I was given men's clothing and some knockoff Converse. And then I was locked in a cell. So I about lost it again, but I just kept praying. I just kept praying because they had to give me a furlough that day. She got me a furlough that day. I went home on furlough, and then I had to report to the halfway house the next day to get orientation, get an ankle monitor put on, and I was out on the CARES Act.
What did it feel like?
Brent, when I got in that vehicle, much like when I went on my furlough, I got car sick. I was almost going to throw up.
Yeah.
Of course, he brought me my phone, and I was on the phone almost the whole 5-hour drive from all the people wanting to talk to me. Many people had left Brian and gotten out of prison. They were calling my husband, checking on me, wanting to talk to me. But we went to Starbucks, just like when I took my furlough. I couldn't order. I didn't even know what I wanted. And I'm a Starbucks addict, by the way. I go daily. People that know me know I'm a Starbucks girl, okay? And I couldn't order something. I just said, order it. I don't care. Just get me something. I looked in the mirror, and I'm like, holy crap. What I look like. Luckily, we had took a razor blade and cut the top off of the white socks they give you, the big tall white athletic socks they give you, tube socks. Yeah. And so I had a ponytail holder. I could put my hair up. I looked at myself in the mirror and I went, what the crap? I just put my hair back up and went, Jesus, everybody seeing me today thinks, what is going on? I immediately climbed in the back seat and changed clothes. He brought me the clothes. I self-surrendered to prison. The same clothes he had brought me when I had my furlough, because when you're not at your home, you don't even know anything to tell your husband to bring you to wear.
That's true.
You know, like, and I knew that I had it put in a box and mailed back to him when I self-surrendered. Yeah. He brought it to the furlough. I'd worn it then. He took it back home. I said, I don't know. What'd you do with those clothes? He goes, they're in there in the suit. You know, I never unpacked that suitcase I brought for you. I said, well, go in there and wash them. Bring those, you know. So he brought them. I climbed in the back seat. But as soon as he got out the gate, I said, stop. And of course, I hugged him, kissed him, touched his hair. But as we're driving home, every now and then I would just reach over there and touch his arm. I would touch his hair. It's like I'm in a vehicle, our vehicle, with my husband headed to our home. It was surreal. I mean, it was. I mean, I'd had that short furlough that day with him, but otherwise I had visits with him on hard plastic chairs eating bad junk food in the room.
Big difference.
Where they're yelling at you, you know, and all kinds of other people trying to visit with their family. But I'm one of the lucky ones.
I want to get into, because there's a lot of craziness that happened. You got home, and you still you're in the halfway house home confinement deal, and you're blogging, you're on podcasts, your TV, all these things going on. And
at a radio show of my own.
On a radio show of your own. And what happens?
I put out a blog post around Christmas called The Grinch Resides at FPC Brian. And
it was also retweeted by
Piper Kerman, Orange is the New Black, and it went viral. Yeah. And I was advocating for the women that was at Brian. I'd been advocating for.
They shut down everything. There were no visits, no phone, no core links, nothing.
No, they couldn't have contact with their children on Christmas. They'd already done them this way on Thanksgiving, and they were doing it again. And the reason was they were mad at the women at Brian because they had COVID. Now, where do you think COVID came from?
They had to come from the guards because they can't go anywhere.
Exactly. And they hadn't had any visits. So they were mistreating them like they always do women. And so my whole article, I put it out and tweeted it, put it on my blog. And at the time I was writing for the Midnight Report. I put it out on it too. And I was making it very public. And it got, like you said, retweeted by Piper Kerman. And it, of course, ticked them off. And they took action to retaliate. And so I got a call shortly after Christmas from the halfway house. Come to find out, the SIS lady at Brian, Miss Mitchell, had contacted my future PO. She'd made it her business to find out who wasn't even my PO yet. I was still on CARES Act. And she had called her. And my future PO had called the halfway house. But she had told him, like, I don't see things she's done wrong. Like, there's no rule that prevents her from there's nothing. She's not done anything. And, I was on Core Links talking to people I left behind using my real name, my real email address, nothing hidden, nothing. I thought I was doing nothing wrong. Absolutely. And so I got a call from my case manager. I'd gotten a new case manager. My old one had gone on maternity leave. She had only briefly had me, but she knew my track record there. I'd never not, they call me, I mean, I did everything I was supposed to. I'd never left my home when I wasn't supposed to, whatever they told me to do, I'd always done, and had been, cordial to those people, never had an issue. And I'd been on it for 8 months, by the way, by now. I'd been home 8 months. And so she told me that there'd been a report and she started asking me these things like, do you have a blog? I'm like, yes, I do. But I got written up for that in prison, and I fought it, and Region Legal agrees with me that I can blog. So I'm letting you know that right up front, that I've already been down this road. So she says, are you talking to inmates that are still in prison? I said, absolutely. I said, I'm using core links, and I also mailed in 35 Christmas cards to Brian, to women. And then I mailed some to other prisons that we got addresses of people. We had a Christmas card list. I was very honest. She said, you can't do that. I said, what policy is that? Where's the policy? She even told me I couldn't blog. I said, where's that policy at? Show me the policy that says I can't do these things. She goes, well, I just don't think you can. I said, but what policy prevents that? I said, I knew their manual backwards and forwards. I quoted her own manual. It said, you may not contact someone that's in the halfway house with you or another inmate using your cell phone. I was using my computer to get straight on the BOP's email system core links. I was not, and it said to text, by the way. I was not texting anybody. I was not talking to them on my phone. I was using their monitored email system where they could read everything that was being said. And I quoted her policy. I said, your policy says I cannot use my cell phone to communicate with anybody that's at the halfway house or that's still in prison, to text them. I've not texted anybody. So what policy prevents me from having contact with the people I just served time with? And I'm still considered BOP property. I'm still in the BOP. I'm just serving my time a different way. What policy? And she couldn't tell me one. So then I said, well, she said, but you can't talk to them anymore. I said, well, what about my radio show? She's like, what radio show? I said, the one I do every other Friday or every Friday on, from my house and I have other prisoners, people that just got out of prison come on it, and people call in from prison. She's like, oh, I don't think you can do that. And I said, well, that's not what policy says. And I quoted her the exact policy, because I'm the policy girl, and I make sure if I'm going to do something, I'm not violating anything. So I looked up the media policy. I knew my rights, and I quoted it. She goes, well, I'm going to have to get with Region. I'm going to have to get with the RRM on that. So a week or so goes by, and I can't do my radio show. And I'm like, I go in for my regular check-in. I said, what'd you find out? Well, I haven't found out anything yet. I said, well, I've got a radio show this Friday I plan on doing. I need to know. So still didn't find anything. A few days go by. I email her and Carbon, the director of the halfway house, and I quote policy. I give them a copy of BOP's program statement on, basically being on any kind of media. And basically the only time permission is needed is if someone wants to come into a facility. Okay. And then I also point out Michael Cohen got violated and took back to prison from home confinement for this very thing. And the judge has already ruled that you cannot take someone's voice. And I quoted that case. Well, they sent that up to RRM, and Sean Smith, who is the RRM at Dallas, who is over Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas, I think. He told them, no, under no uncertain terms can she do that radio show. So I emailed him back and said, I'm going to do what you asked because you're point blank telling me. But just so you know, I need BP 10, because that's where you start when you're at the halfway house. And this is going to go 2 and 11. And I'm going to be filing and fighting this. And the person that promotes my radio show and that I do it on their platform will be going on my radio show tonight. It will move forward, and he will be announcing why I'm not there. And so I was, I fought back. This was on Friday. On Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember if it was Monday or Tuesday. It was on January the 12th of 2021. I go to work at my church. I had 2 jobs. I was working for a lawyer friend, and I was working at my church. I went to work. I called in like I was supposed to before I left my house on the ankle monitor, went to my church, called, let them know I was there. Mid-morning, the director of the halfway house called me and he said, I need you to report back here right now and you need to bring all your equipment for your ankle monitor. He said, as much as I don't want to tell you this, you're being violated. He said that came straight from Region. It's out of our control. I have an incident report here. I have to serve on you. And he goes, but I want you to know it's not we're not the ones doing this. You've been a model inmate, and I want you to know this is not us, but this is a direct order. And I have to have you here within the hour. So I called Poncho. He was working next door. His CPA firm's next door across the street from our church. And I called him and I said, meet me at the house right now. I'm going home to take off all my jewelry, put on some old clothes, and you have to take me to the halfway house. I'm pretty sure that the U.S. Marshal is about to pick me up, and I feel like I'll probably be taken first to Pulaski County Jail because I knew that was a holding facility because I'd helped other people that had been in holding, since I'd been home, and that's where they were. And he was like, you're joking, right? He really thought I was playing a prank. I said, I wish I was, but I'm in my car right now driving home. So in the meantime, when I found out that from the halfway house, I had called my PO. I'd got her name and called her because I didn't want her thinking I was some troublemaker out here. And she'd already come to my house and met me after that and told me, no, if you've got something to expose, just expose it. And I was like, I hit the jackpot. This woman is by policy. Like, she is good. So I was really excited I was getting her. And she'd come introduce myself, me to her at my house. And, she had went to bat for me already, basically, and wasn't even my PO. So I called her. I got home. I went and unregistered myself for my classes. I was supposed to start class the very next day. We'd already paid for it. I was finishing my master's, had a class and an internship, had already secured an internship. And so I went and unregistered because I didn't want my husband. I mean, I knew policy. I knew I was going to lose 30 days good time. I'd already went and looked at the calendar. I was going to go either stay at the county or be shipped back through Oklahoma to Aliceville. And I would be there till possibly June, probably, because my out date at that time was May, but I knew they would take 30 days of good time for a 100 series shot, or they wrote me a 300 series, but I knew what they were going to do. I knew their playbook. They're as predictable as prosecutors. So anyway, I knew, and I had warned Poncho. And so I unregistered myself from college. I called the PO and told her what was going on. But what the BOP and the halfway house didn't know, because I had no reason to tell them, was on December the 2nd of that year, about a month and a half previous, I had filed a pro se motion for compassionate release. And I had filed it. Number one, my mother's ill and I wanted to help take care of her. But number two, I had been asking for trauma counseling from what I went through at Oklahoma since I got to the halfway house for 8 months. And I had been put
and they
off.
weren't aware of this.
Oh, the BOP was aware because they had kept denying the counseling. They kept putting it off. So I had attached that as
they were aware of your filing of the compassionate release.
No, they were aware that I'd been asking for counseling and they hadn't got it for me.
Right.
So I filed a compassionate release under several extraordinary and compelling reasons. Number one, I had not been given counseling and I was still suffering. As someone with the mental health degree, basically, I knew that I was suffering from traumas, PTSD, and just trauma from prison, And so I also argued about my mother being sick and I had not seen her since I'd been home. I could not go help her. She couldn't come to my house without approval to live here because she was not a resident that was approved to live here, because you have to go through getting people approved for you to be on home confinement. And I argued also that I was about to start an internship wearing an ankle monitor. And how am I going to go work in a mental health facility and get my master's with wearing an ankle monitor? Come on. How was that going to work? And so I had filed that on December the 2nd of 2020. And it had not been ruled on yet. So I told my PO was aware. I told her I'd filed it and that I was hoping to, finish my master's and all that. And that I had signed up for classes. She even helped the halfway house to approve me to go to those classes because even though they were going to be online, there may be some times I had to drive 2 hours to the college because my college was over 2 hours away. And that would be something that was kind of tricky. And I had to do an internship during the day to graduate. And that meant I had to go work somewhere all day at a mental health facility and go into like mental health hospitals and things.
On the compassionate release, do you get any information, or is it just with the judge and the judge just has it until they rule?
Well, the government gets to answer. They get to object, which they did.
Yeah.
You
right.
know,
I understand that, but I'm just saying you
no,
you didn't know. You didn't know what was going to happen.
Well, and I didn't know.
She'd had it for a while.
She had it.
She had it for a while.
Well, that day, here's another thing I did, which I think escalated her to looking at it, because the day that they told me I had to report, I also called and told them, hey, I have a compassionate release pending and I've seen no movement on it. And she's like, well, we'll get to it. And I said, okay, you know, I just wanted to check on it. And I called my PO too. And then she started asking questions of them as well. Because, you know, POs work for the judges. POs are part of the court system. They actually work for the judges.
Right.
For the federal court system.
So did they come and pick you up, Lynn?
No, they made me drive to, they made me drive over there. They served me with the incident report. They cut off my ankle monitor, and they kept telling us. And
your incident is emailing inmate.
396, violation of community program. It said that I had been talking to, and it named some inmates on core links. Okay. And that they had been calling into my radio show. He even had to put that in there. You know, there's the real dig right there. I was still advocating against the BOP is what it amounts to. But at any rate, and I have the back emails between me and them, you know, that prove what the real deal was. But at any rate, so they let me sit there with my husband. They tell him, they keep profusely apologizing. Several staff members, look, this is not our choice. If it was up to us, this would not be happening. You've been a model inmate. We're sorry, but you know, this is not us doing this. And
you're
so
going into county jail.
When the marshals come, they tell my husband he has to leave. The marshals handcuff, belly chain, the whole thing again, just like Con Air. I didn't even cry. Didn't even feel like crying, Brett. By this time, I'm so numb through this entire system that honestly, I didn't cry when I went back to the county jail, but in a way, I also saw it as a do-over from God. I know that sounds a little crazy to people that may not have a relationship with God, but to me, through my anger and through my time in prison, I had rejected God so many times when he convicted me, and I knew the right path. I've been in church my whole life. You know, I knew I was wrong, but I was so angry. I kept letting the anger get in my head. And I had gotten so far, and I was like, you know, this isn't going to take me backwards. So I just prayed. I was like, God, I'm your willing servant. Here I am. I don't want to be here, but here I am. So I had peace about the situation. I got a Bible, started reading at the county jail. But this marshal that took me, we get in the car and I could see my husband down the street. And I'm like, God, why is he watching me come to a car like this? Why didn't he just drive on away? But I guess he wanted just to make sure I was okay. But I could see his car sitting a block or so down the street, you know, on public property. They couldn't make him leave that. So anyway, I go out to the county jail. But in the car, the marshal says, what'd you do, flunk a drug screen? I just laughed. It's like, no, sir, I don't do drugs. He goes, well, you didn't look like the type. He goes, but that's usually what I take people back to prison for. What'd you do? So between the little bar things that he was talking to me through in the car, I just gave him the copy of the incident because I'd asked for it because I wanted to take it with me because I knew the process and I was going to fight it. And so I handed it to him. He read it. He goes, wait, what? He read it again. He said, wait, I'm taking you back to prison for emails? I was like, yes, sir. He goes, I've never heard of such. What'd you really do? So then I told him about the radio show and all that in my blog. He wrote my blog down. He's like, I'm going to read this. This has got to be good. He goes,
check it out.
He goes, now you told me what you're really going back for. He goes, I knew there was more to it. And he stayed at the county jail with me and made sure I got processed in and talked to me and sit there and chatted me up until they put me in a holding cell. And, you know, I even gave him a shout out on my blog when I got back out. The blog post is staycation at the county jail. But when I got back out of there, I said, hey, Mr. U.S. Marshal, if you're reading this, like you said, you know, here's your shout out basically, because he really told me he was going to go read my blog. But anyway, I got booked in, got taken up to a women's quarantine unit because they were also, COVID's in full swing. So finally, I'm taking, it was freezing cold. I stayed most of the night in a holding cell, and I finally got up to the unit 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Who knows? I can't even remember. But so I knew policy, and I knew the BOP had 14 days to bring me before what's called the DHO. I had already had my community one because they had me on a phone with the halfway house, 5 or 6 days in, whenever you have to be teamed on an incident report, what's called team at the halfway house. The halfway house has a staff that does it. It's unit team when you're inside the prison, but it's called community. It's instead of UDC, it's CDC, community team. But anyway, they had already called me, and I'd already told them I'm not guilty and I'm gonna keep fighting this. And I was quoting policy. I didn't even have policy with me, but I knew it so much I was quoting it to them. And I quoted them the 14 days and all this. And I said, I better have a hearing in 14 days or, y'all best not, they better let me out of here. So anyway, in the interim, the government got told, this is the judge about a week into this called the PO and said, hey, you need to prepare. I'm putting someone out on compassionate release and they're going to be, coming under you. So the PO said, well, I need to advise you that this person's sitting at the county jail of having been violated from the CARES Act. Can you imagine? The judge didn't know. So the judge at that
could have been bad. Which could have been bad.
So the judge
could have gone the other way.
Well, the judge at that point sent something over to the government and gave them, I think, 5 days, 3 days, I don't remember, but she gave them X amount of days to answer why I was violated and to give her some kind of proof of what I'd done. So, the government answered and told what a bad person I was and how I didn't deserve it. And I needed to go right on back to prison and all the things I'm complaining about, like needing counseling and wanting to finish my master's. Well, none of that would be needed if I was back in prison. So, my whole arguments were just not even needed because I needed to be back in prison. So anyway, from a county jail on a little pad that you can use there that you get 30 minutes on, I typed a response, quoting policy, quoting everything, and emailed it to my husband and had him copy paste and file it for me. So the judge, and not only did I tell her that, I also told her about my skin cancer they let me get. I told her about how I'd been retaliated on all through prison for speaking out, how I'd been shipped on Con Air for I just spilled the whole beans. Like I just said, okay, you know what? I'm putting it all on record right now. I don't give a hoot. They're going to lie and say that I was a bad person in prison. Let me just let you know, Judge, what really happened. And so I laid it all out there. And I told her I currently had a spot on my chest that needed to go to the dermatologist, and they were telling me it'd be months. Not only that, it was going to be months before I could see a counselor in the county jail if I ever got to see one. And I wrote all that, typed it all up. My husband took it to the courthouse and filed it for me. So she had my other side of it. Government, of course, answered, I'm a bad person, threats to society, needed to be right back where I was. And, the playbook they always say about everybody. It doesn't matter if, they're going to say the same thing. You don't need to be out of prison. So that answer was sent to my husband, and he told me, the PO sent it to him. He said, hey, PO had been talking to him, keeping him abreast of what's going on. He said, the judge ruled against you. I expected it. I was back there sitting there under violation. So I figured she would. They're never going to believe you. They're going to believe the prosecutor. I'd seen it my whole case. So I was peaceful with it. I was like, okay, God, here we go. Obviously, Aliceville needs me to tear them up or something because I'd heard they were pretty much second to none next to Brian, being mean to women and treating them bad. I said, okay. On day 15, the staff announces to me to pack my stuff. I'm going home. So I think, okay, they dropped this crazy shot because they didn't go through with their 14 days because I knew day 14 had passed and this was day 15. I called my husband. He goes, no, the judge granted your compassionate release yesterday and gave them till 3 o'clock today to let you out.
So she changed her mind.
She didn't change her mind. My husband saw what the government answered and thought that was the judge had filed that.
Oh my gosh. All right, now that makes sense.
Denied it. However, she had not even ruled on it yet.
She just hadn't ruled yet.
But that PO,
Okay,
PO
you really had me confused
that
there.
PO kept going over there. I found this out later. She kept going over there saying, when are you going to rule on this? This lady is sitting in a county jail. So my wish for anybody that's going to prison or getting out of prison is that they could have Victoria Fitzhugh for their PO.
Oh, yeah.
She is an amazing person. She follows the law. She follows the rules. She wants people to be successful. She does exactly
and that's a good point to make, Lynn, is that it's not 100% of everybody in any business or at any place. There are good people trying to do good things.
Absolutely.
And then there's bad apples, and it gets a black eye to everybody. So, Lynn, I know you survived all that.
I did.
And you are back in the world of, and you're still advocating.
Went on to graduate, called my advisor, got back in my classes after those 2 weeks, graduated with my master's. I sit on the Federal Advisory Council for Dream.org. I sit on
which is an awesome organization.
They are.
A big shout out to Dream.org.
Absolutely.
I know some people on there, and Candia Milton's been on this podcast. It's just a really great organization. It's all about the right things.
I love Candia. He is a great guy doing great work. I sit on the Hills Board at the University of Arkansas for Medical Science, which is a board that is a research board, and it's doing research on mental health issues inside the prison with incarcerated people.
I love that.
So I sit on that. And I recently started working with the Remedy Project, which is a project that is funded through grants that helps to people who are incarcerated with administrative remedies.
I love it. I love it. A seat at the table with Lynn. A seat at the table with Lynn. Lynn, I want to ask you this question because you've been through, this has been one hell of a journey that you've been through. And you survived. You made it to the other side. And you adapted to all the different things that you went through. Stronger for it. Stronger through the struggles. What do you think, for the listeners out there, is your biggest takeaway through all this?
Stay true to yourself.
Yep.
Don't be a Lynn Espejo unless they're really violating your rights. Just turn a blind eye to it and go about your business. I try to coach people that I coach going into prison to do a me. I did hear from some people I served time with Brian at when they were locked down during COVID and getting mistreated, that the coined phrase that they said to guards was, "Don't make me go Espejo on you." So that was like the thing that was going around Brian for a while. But anyway,
that's so funny.
Try not to get angry. Try not to let this change who you are inside, because
don't lose yourself. Don't become prison Brent or prison Lynn. Stay Lynn.
Don't be me. And just make the best.
I think I don't think that
you're gonna.
I don't think that you lost yourself. I don't think you lost yourself in prison. And you're using your journey to help people, and there's so much appreciation for that, because it's such an unknown thing, and any kind of peace that you can give somebody that's getting ready to start that journey or return home from that journey is so much appreciated. I want to remind everybody to reach out, get your book, Inside the Walls, and beyond. And as far as getting to Lynn, what's the best way to get to you, Lynn?
I'm real transparent with my phone number and email. If you go on Amazon, you can easily, get my information. But I run a page called, several pages on Facebook. I'll give you the links to post.
Okay.
You can email me through my blog.
And I can put that in the show notes.
I'll give you my email.
Yep.
I give away my cell phone number very easily, and
it's a great thing, Lynn. I appreciate so much you being on today and sharing your story. And then if you go to find Lynn's book on Amazon, go ahead and find my book, Nightmare Success. They're both there.
I'm reading it right now. It's a great book.
Thank you,
Highly
Lynn.
recommended.
I appreciate that. Go to BrentCassidy.com. My website. That's with a TY, not a DY. Keep up the shares, the follows, subscriptions, the likes, the comments, all that stuff. It's so great. I so much appreciate it. As I used to say to people when I was writing my emails back and forth, encore links from prison. Stay strong. I'll do the same. Lynn, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Brent. Thank you so much for letting me come on and talk. I told you I'm not that interesting. The people I gave you names are way more interesting, but I appreciate
You've got a great story.
Showcasing my story as well. Thank you.
Great story, Lynn. Appreciate it. Nightmare Success, in and out.